Okay, so this is video 2 for Unit 5 Evolution. This is right after the Darwin video, so you should have had your abiotic and biotic factors listed. And we talked about gradualism, descent with modification, natural selection in the last video. So just kind of a quick recap on this. The idea behind Darwin's natural selection is that within a population, there's naturally existing variation of the genome. And we've talked about this already at length in class. So things like being taller or faster or shorter or having less fat cells or more fat cells or light fur or hair, dark fur or hair, wisdom teeth, claws, an extra digit on your hands, an extra digit on your toes, losing toes, gaining toes, all of the different variations we can have by slight mutations in the genome, and not just for people, for all animals. And plants too, don't forget about plants too. So certain plants have flowers that attract different bugs. Certain plants can release chemicals if a bug is trying to eat them. Certain plants can actually change color or move depending on where the sun is or where their predators are coming from or what is growing around them. So all populations of organisms have inherent genetic variation, which means built-in different genes in the population. Depending on the environment that the organism lives in, some of those traits are going to be beneficial, some of those traits are not going to be beneficial for survival, and we called that fitness. So an organism who is tall in an environment where there is food way up high is going to do better than an organism who is short in an environment where food is way up high. A great example of this are giraffe necks. So originally there were multiple variations of giraffe neck length. Tall, short, medium, etc. Some of them still exist. The closest relative to the giraffe is called the okapi, and it looks like a weird little zebra giraffe, and it's got a shorter neck. And because giraffes lived in the Serengeti where the food was all up high, the taller giraffes over time did better at getting food, therefore had more energy for mating and survival, and could produce more offspring overall. So what ended up happening over time is the population shifted from having an immediate number of long-necked giraffes to having a large number of long-necked giraffes. And those other short neck genes died out of the population as those organisms could not compete for food and space and survival. So that's the whole idea behind natural selection. Currently in class, we're working on and off on our evolution packet. So these are the proofs of evolution. So the video talked to you a lot about embryology, the idea that all of us from a same common ancestor. So again, this is not a similarity between organisms on different branches of the evolutionary tree. Something like a bug and a mammal, for example, would not share these similarities. But anything that comes from a common ancestor, like anything with a spine, so fish, salamanders, turtles, chickens, pigs, rabbits, cows, this is a cow, sorry, rabbit, people, we are all vertebrate organisms. We all came from the same group of common ancestors that shared a common genome. We all have variations on those original traits, like the movie showed you. Some have been turned on, some have been turned off, but they're all the same. Because of that, we end up seeing a lot of what are called similar comparative anatomies, and this is what was also brought up in the movie. Comparative means we're comparing one thing to another thing. Anatomy is a fancy way for saying body structures. So if we're comparing anatomy, we're looking at similar body structures and how they are the same when they come from a common ancestor. So this is a human, a horse, a cat, a bat, a bird, and a whale. We are all mammals, with the exception of the bird. We all come from a vertebrate common ancestor, all the way back to the earliest fish, like Tiktaalik. We could trace us all back to Tiktaalik genetically. And because of that, we see that this is that one bone, two bones, many bones that the movie talked to you guys about. So this would be called a homologous structure. It's structures that are found across different species within the same genome. So that basically means it's a structure that came from the same DNA of a shared common ancestor. So again, that is a homologous structure. We also have things called analogous structures, like an analogy where two things are kind of similar but not exactly the same. So here's a bat wing and here's a bird wing. These would be homologous, and you can see there's the purple bones, green bone, red bone. You can't really see it in here because it's so tiny, but there is a little teeny tiny green bone, and here's another teeny tiny green bone, and yellow bones for the phalanges and the metacarpals. So because bats and birds came from the same species, eons and millennia ago, they have that same bone structure. Down here, we see an insect wing. So notice there are no bones in the insect wing at all. Insects have an exoskeleton. Their structure is made by different sugar bases in their cells. So this is an insect wing. This would be analogous to these two homologous structures. So bat, bird, homologous, same DNA, same structure, same bone, same gene. Insect wing, analogous. It's like a bat wing and a bird wing, but it is different. It is not from the same DNA. It is not from the same common ancestor. Analogous structures spring from use. So if you live in an environment where your food is capable of flight, and it helps you survive if you can fly to find a mate, to get food, to hide from predators, to beat out competition, you're going to eventually end up with similar structures through mutation and natural selection. And this is what we see here. Things like flight in insects, flight in aves, which are birds, and flight in mammalia, which are mammals. This is a cross-species similarity. It is not necessarily from the same DNA. We see the same thing with fish fins being homologous to whale fins, being homologous to penguin flippers. So those are all homologous structures used for swimming because it was a beneficial adaptation within that environment. It allowed them to survive. The important thing to recognize here is that we do not get adaptations because we need them or want them. It comes from a genetic mutation most of the time, 99% of the time. So we have very different examples of genetic mutations. We can have silent mutations, which is when the DNA pattern changes, but it still makes the same protein. We could have a nonsense mutation, which is when the genetic pattern changes enough that we make no protein. So this would be the difference of you, for example, having an arm or not having an arm. And then sometimes we'll have missense mutations, which would be a slight change in the protein code that actually creates something completely different. So this would be an example of something going wrong in the Sonic Hedgehog gene, slightly changing the protein that that gene creates, and all of a sudden you've got 8 or 10 fingers instead of 5 on one hand. So point mutations, deletions, substitutions, chromosome mutations during crossing over where one part doesn't break off right or completely changes, those are going to lead us to these very different evolutionary structures. And then the environment is going to affect those structures further, and we're going to get all of these radiating adaptations that are different from each other. So that's just kind of a quick sum up of the idea of natural selection. And we are working on all of this stuff in class, but I thought if anybody was lost or wanted to take some notes or write slowly, that I would make a video for you. Thank you.